Hello everybody of the vinyl community, John here. Recently I just finished the series I've had on my channel that had kind of lasted 10 years, well, from start to finish. It was the series about my hard rock and heavy metal, and I spoke about how I'd separated my heavy metal records out of my collection to make space, and also because I didn't really necessarily listen to an awful lot of heavy metal anymore after my children were born. Now, when I did that, there were certain artists that I was sort of, on the fence about, should they be lumped in with heavy metal or do they count as something else? And I tried to kind of sort of quantify it and make some sort of a description as to why certain artists wouldn't be lumped in with the heavy metal. But to be honest with you, I think it just comes down to a gut feeling. I mean, there are certain artists that remain in my collection shelves and haven't been taken out because I genuinely like to listen to them, and if I had to go up into the loft where my heavy metal records were, it would be an extra effort, and I didn't want to have to go through that. A good example, for instance, is Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath, many people will tell you, are the sort of first original heavy metal band. And there'd be an argument as to, well, why, John, wouldn't you put those together with all of your records by Judas Priest, for instance? Yeah, I can't really answer it other than that I don't want to put them in there because I think of them as something else, 70s hard rock. And that's why they remain in the shelves here. So I'm going to show albums now by bands that have remained in my shelves that are hard rock, but yeah, they're not really heavy metal. So, and you'll see what I mean when I show this first band. So I started, I don't know if you can see right up there in the corner, started off up there, and I've gone through and I found 3 artists in that, just in that first square, first cube, that fit nicely into this, and I'm just going to talk my way through records of the first 2 artists and we'll see how we go. I don't think there's quite as many as this in all of the squares, but I'll work my way through. So the first artist, I guess you can work it out for yourself really, is AC/DC. Yeah, not heavy metal. I mean, you could argue, yeah, they certainly had a huge influence on heavy metal with their sound and their style, but they're not a metal band, and they are a band that I'm more likely to listen to than, many of the others, like Wasp that I showed in my last heavy metal video, for instance. This is their first album released here in Europe. They released 2 albums in Australia, I understand. I don't have those, sadly, but this is the first European release. It's actually a first press as well. A lot of these early AC/DC records I'm going to show now are ones that I've had in my collection for many years, and I really can't remember how they got there. I've got a distant memory when I lived in Portsmouth of one of the students that I studied with, a guy called Richard Lamb. Hi Richard, if you're watching. He had a visit one weekend with from his brother. He had a younger brother come and stay with him in Portsmouth, and they came to my student flat in my room, and I had sort of my records there, and he was going through them, and he was amazed that I had all these early AC/DC records. That's my sort of earliest memory of reference to AC/DC in my collection, and I think I must have perhaps picked them up while I lived in Portsmouth. Back in, so that would have been sort of, yeah, starting from 89, 90, 91, 92. So yeah, that's the first one. And we got the second album, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. Brilliant. I think this is probably one of my favourites, although to be honest with you, I think you can successfully play these intermittently and they're all as good in their own way. Let There Be Rock. This is, I believe, a German pressing. This was first UK press. So this was a German pressing, Let There Be Rock. And then I got Power Rage. Yeah, that's the first UK press too. And yeah, I would have been a student when I bought these from one of the stores that sold used records in Portsmouth at the time. I wouldn't have been particularly wealthy because I was a student and had a grant, and so I don't suppose I spent more than £3 or £4 on these. £5 maximum, but that would have been the outer limit. Highway to Hell. So this is the last album, the last studio album they did with Bon Scott, isn't it? Impressive cover that is. Great album. Like I said, all of those, they're all really, really good. I think I've got the majority of them. There may be one that I'm missing. I'm not sure. I'll write here if there is one I'm missing. I've got a couple of copies of this live album. If You Want Blood, you got it. And what's really, really amazing about these early AC/DC albums is they, like a few of the other bands I'm going to talk about, they are sort of so good at distilling that feeling of being a hot-blooded teenage youth, you know, and all of the urges and all the things that drive you and everything like that. They pick up on these and they celebrate it in such a way. Great music to listen to before you go out for a party, for instance, or a night on the town. Now, this is my entry point for AC/DC. And now, now all these things start to fall into place. So I got this my second term studying in Portsmouth. First term, I stayed in an apartment with a Liverpudlian lady and just paid rent. And that didn't work out very well. In fact, she actually got into trouble because it turned out it was a council flat and she shouldn't have been renting out. She didn't have permission. So the next term I had to move out anyway because she got caught out. I knew nothing about this, but when I moved there, she had a spare bedroom because her daughter had moved away to Australia, and her daughter left her records behind, and I quite enjoyed them, and this was one of those. And yeah, for me it was sort of, like I say, my entry point into AC/DC. Ripped my head off, you know. At this time it was so loud, it was so heavy, it was so aggressive. Brian Johnson's voice was really, really sort of tests you out of limits of you know, able to listen to some harsh stuff. But on top of that, it's just a fantastic, brilliant album, an absolute masterpiece, this. And I can only think, because this was my entry point, I can only think that when I went out looking at records in record shops there in Portsmouth, I would have picked up all those ones I've just shown now, the earlier ones. It was before the internet, so I had no way of looking up and understanding why the singer sounded like this in these albums and why the singer sounds different now. I could tell that it was a different person, but I didn't know why, and I didn't really understand because, well, you know, the only information you could get was read in sort of magazines, and that wasn't always the kind of information that you needed right there and then. Anyway, brilliant album. My entry point. I would have picked up this one too, in a similar way, you know. And for a while, I can remember I had this back to back with Black and Back. Oh, that's a different one. Back to back with Back in Black on a C90 that went round and round and round in the cassette player in my car after I finished studying. A good album. Again, very harsh. Perhaps not quite as good as Back in Black, but it's got certainly got some high points, and certainly a really good album to have and listen to. So it's been a while for this one. I haven't listened to this one for ages. Now, those were my AC/DC records for quite some time, and this next one, is the one released after Let There Be Rock. No, what was it called? For Those About to Rock. But I remember I bought this one in Sweden when I moved there. I would have picked this up used. And, well, it is what it is. Not such a great album. It's again, it's got some good points on it, got some things, but I think, yeah, they were sort of rejecting this whole thing about, you know, Mutt Lange's production style that sort of pushed them to their limits. And I feel that, I think by this time they decided to do it themselves, but it sounds like they've done it themselves. It hasn't got that same quality that you'd get from a Mutt Lange production. And the songs aren't quite as good there either. So that's all I've got there in that lot. And then the last AC/DC album I've got on vinyl is this, and this is one that I've picked up in recent years. I remember there was a lot of disdain about this and the Fly on the Wall album. I never really understood. The Fly on the Wall album is a bit ropey. The production on that is quite difficult. I mean, Brian Johnson's got a challenging voice at the best of times, but on that, with all the reverberation and everything, it's quite painful to listen to. This one's pretty good. I actually quite like this. It's got some really good tracks on it, but I think maybe the fans felt that it was getting a bit too commercial, a bit too accessible, perhaps, because I mean, you know, I guess they were having video hits and being on MTV and that sort of thing, which wasn't the done thing, perhaps, if you're a rock band. Anyway, so that's my AC/DC records. Not heavy metal, but definitely hard rock. I've got a few their albums on CD. I've got Razor's Edge on CD. Love to have that on vinyl. It's a brilliant album, but I don't. And then the latter ones that they released weren't really my thing. I think by then they'd sort of become formulaic. They weren't sort of pushing the envelope any further, and they'd become like a caricature of themselves. Anyway, so that's my AC/DC records. So the next artist that I'm going to show and talk about, again from way up there in that corner, Cube, is another band that begins with A. They're not heavy metal, but they're definitely hard rock, and I've kept them here in my shelves here. And if you can guess who that may be, I've got Aerosmith. This is the first Aerosmith album. Picked this one up in California when I lived there. A yard sale special. Great album. Really quite good. And this is the second album, Get Your Wings. Again, when I picked up in California when I lived there. It's interesting, certain albums were really prevalent when you went out in the wild. This would have been 2012, 2013, when I was there doing this. And yeah, I said to a friend of mine just yesterday about Traffic. I used to see Traffic albums all the time in the US, in California, everywhere. Traffic albums, and all the Traffic albums I've got have been ones that I've bought back from the United States. I mean, I go record shopping just like the rest of everybody else here on the VC here in the UK. But never ever see a Traffic album, and I just don't understand why that should be. Anyway, so this is Rocks by Aerosmith. I think it's their fourth album. So I've got the first two. I think it's the third one that I'm missing. That's Rocks. And somewhere earlier on in here, yeah, we should have this one. Now this is the real total classic. Toys in the Attic. This was the second album by them that I got. And I'll talk a little bit more about how it came to be, but really good album. Production's a little bit muddy, I think. But I think, you know, it's fair to say those early Aerosmith albums, they were kind of doing all sorts of drugs and stuff like that. And I guess things could have been done better than they actually were, but it was the time and it was who the band were in those days. Aerosmith, Night in the Ruts, another very good record, brought back from the US. And then I've got Draw the Line. I think, yeah, perhaps not one of their stronger albums, it's a little bit weaker, but a good listen anyway. I haven't got Rock in a Hard Place, and I don't have what's that one, All Done with Mirrors. I've got that on CD, but I don't have it on vinyl. And this brings me up to my entry point, and that was this album. This is another album that I come to start listening to in Portsmouth when I was a student there. It was one that I bought brand new when it was released. I used to listen to the music, I used to read the music press, particularly Raw and Kerrang, and when this sort of was on its way out, it was heavily publicised. They had that huge single, Love in an Elevator, and I was, yeah, just getting ears to start listening to hard rock and heavy metal. A friend of mine had introduced me to Motorhead. I discovered that Back in Black, and that sort of, you know, completely sort of knocked me for six. And I thought, well, I better get this album because it's bound to be really, really good. And it was. And I've got this theory because I think a lot of the time entry point records generally tend to be your favourite. I guess because they set the bar, don't they? They set the standard by which you measure everything else by that artist or that band by. But hey, this is a really good album. I've heard some people, what's his name? Scotty's Records. I remember him saying that he didn't like this because he thought it was a bit too commercial, a bit too poppy and everything like that. But for me, it's fantastic. Before they released this, they did Permanent Vacation. I don't have a copy of that, but I bought my son a copy of it, which he has in his room that he never plays because he doesn't play records because he's 18. He used to play records when he was younger, but now it's not cool, I suppose. So I've got that in the house, but it's technically not mine, it's his. So that was my entry point. Really, really good record. And after this, when I fell in love with this record, I went out and bought Toys in the Attic, which I've just shown. And that was my second one. And it's like, wow, what a couple of records to introduce you to a band to make you feel like, yes, I've got to get so much of everything else that they've done. I don't like the music that they did after that, you know, these albums that they released, because they really were sort of radio rock friendly type things. Hits, MTV videos and things like that. They were no longer the sort of the smoky rock band that they were. They were instead a machine to make lots of money with. And yeah, just don't like their latter stuff. So I don't have any of that. The only thing I do have is this compilation called Gems, which has got some of the great hits on it. But there you go. So that's 2 hard rock bands from my record collection that don't exist in my heavy metal shelves. Check in for the next episode of this, where I'll be talking about other artists. I think I'll start off with Alice Cooper. Anyway, thanks very much. Check out my next video. Bye.